What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. As I mentioned yesterday, the Rockets are the best team in the league against the best teams in the league. Going into last night's slate, they had 14 wins against teams that are in the top 10 in point differential, according to Cleaning the Glass, which was sole possession of most in the league. Now, after last night, it's weird. The top 10 point differential teams have jumbled a little bit, but after last night, the Rockets now have 12 wins against teams that are in the top 10 in point differential, but that's 2 more than any other team in the league has. They've been very good in these types of matchups. They get up for them, they have the athletes to hang, and they can cause a lot of problems for teams. This was the Amen Thompson and Dillon Brooks game. How about 69 points on 42 shots? And they needed every single one of those points because Boston put the clamps on Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green in this game. And as I've mentioned a lot in the past, like this team, when Fred and Jalen struggle on offense in a game, it's usually a death sentence because they already struggle enough to score in the half court. And those are their 2 best perimeter initiators. Those guys went 5 for 22 from the field in this game. Fred was really struggling to get separation really from anyone. And then Jalen Green was getting separation and he was getting downhill, but his jump shot was off. So whenever he got free from the perimeter, he wasn't knocking shots down. And then whenever he drove to the basket, he kind of was just barreling like a bull in a china shop into like 6 bodies and missing kick out reads and trying to force stuff in traffic, which was leading to turnovers and missed shots. So they get almost nothing from Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green, and it doesn't matter because you get 69 points from Amen Thompson and Dillon Brooks. They more than made up for it. With Dillon Brooks, it was mostly about hitting spot-up threes. There was some shot making in there, and his shot making has been kind of an interesting trend in the last couple of games. He hit some big shots in the game in Cleveland, too, in the first half. But it was all about spot-up shooting in this one. A lot of nail help from Boston, a lot of like trying to pack the paint, test their playmaking ability. And when those kick-out passes came to Dillon Brooks, he just kept knocking them down. He had a big one that started the 13-0 run. Boston goes up 12 in the early fourth quarter. He had a big one that cut that lead down to 9 and kind of started that run. He also hit another one in crunch time that put them up by 2. His shot making was just gigantic in this game. And then Amen Thompson, he did a million things to help the Rockets win this game, as he's known to do. That's kind of his thing. He's like the Swiss Army knife of the young star prospect, right? And I want to focus in on the offense, though, because he did have 33 points in this game. He had an unbelievable defensive game. It just one of the crazier defensive plays I've seen. There was a double team of Jayson Tatum where the ball got worked around, and he was guarding Peyton Pritchard way out above the kind of like the top of the key area. And Jrue Holiday was wide open on the left wing, and he peeled off of Peyton Pritchard, somehow blocked Jrue Holiday's 3-point attempt, and saved it in bounds. Like, it was just an unbelievable defensive play. But I want to zoom in on the offensive end of the floor, because he has a remarkable ability to be a threat, considering he can't shoot the basketball from the perimeter. We talked a little bit about this in yesterday's show, but he did hit a corner 3 in this game, but that's not his game. He's not a perimeter shot maker, but he maintains an incredibly high level of offensive impact because he's basically great at everything else on offense. Like, yeah, he's a bad perimeter shooter, but he's an excellent close range shooter. I talked a lot yesterday about his ability to get to spots in the short range, kind of in the middle of the floor, usually in the paint, just outside that restricted area. And when he gets in there, he just has like a bunch of spins and euros and hop steps and different things where he can just kind of get to a spot and pop up off the ground and elevate over somebody and shoot a little floater, a little hook shot, or a very short jump shot. And he's got excellent touch on those shots. After last night's game, he's up to 47% on shots that are in the paint but outside of the restricted area. In his last 10 games, he's shooting 53% on those shots. During a period of time where Amen's averaging 19 points per game, that's where he can be a shot maker within this offense. And it's extremely difficult to guard, specifically because of his athleticism and his ability to pop off the ground. I talked about the play against Evan Mobley where he, in the Cavs game, where he drives baseline and then just pulls into a hard spin move and sinks a floater in the lane, or the shot that he hit against Jaylen Brown to win the game, which was very similar to a Euro step shot he hit during the 13-0 run against Cornet in a drop coverage. It's very Ja Morant-esque, the way he can just pop off the ground in that little, kind of 8 to 12 feet from the rim in the front of the rim area. And then he just has such great touch in that area. And that short range shot making came up time and time again in the fourth quarter of this one. Like I talked about during the 13-0 run, catches a pocket pass and a ball screen with Jalen Green, Euros into a floater right in front of Luke Cornet. He hit a short fadeaway jump shot off of a Şengün post up where he kind of fed it to him right on the right block. And he had to turn over his right shoulder and shoot a fadeaway over Porzingis. But once again, it was in that 8-9 feet from the basket range where he can be deadly. He knocked down the shot. And then, of course, the game winner drawn up for him to attack against Jaylen Brown just hits a hard jab step to the left, gets downhill, Euro steps, and gets to that floater. It just makes him when you really get down to it, it's not all self-creation. And this is where his versatility comes into the equation. Again, he's not a good perimeter jump shooter, but he is great at everything else on offense. Great short-range shot maker, a legit screen and roll threat. He has an excellent feel for cutting. His vertical spacing is as good as any center that's in this league. We're going to talk about these individually in a second. He's the best non-center offensive rebounder in the entire NBA. And then as we mentioned earlier, he's got legit on-ball pop, which we are just barely starting to scratch the surface of. So if you have a list of different things you need to have to be good on offense, yeah, there's a big X next to three-point shot making, but there's a bunch of green check marks next to every single other trait that a player needs to be good on the offensive end of the floor. And so that is what allows him to be a deeply impactful offensive player, despite the fact that he has what many people consider to be a crippling weakness when they're evaluating talent, and maybe something that we need to reevaluate, especially when we're talking about some of the best athletes that come up through the draft. But I want to kind of go through some of these individually. So as a screen and roll threat, we talked about that Euro step floater he hit against Luke Cornet, but it's also as a processor. He's a lightning fast processor. He makes great reads in that short roll area in 4-on-3s. He also makes great reads out of the middle of his zone defense. We talked about that in the Cavs game. He also makes great reads when he catches as a cutter along the baseline and the defense turns and accounts for him. He's just a lightning fast processor that makes him a very good screen and roll threat. He has an excellent feel for cutting. He capped off that 13-0 run with a great cut off of Jaylen Brown. It's like 101 to 100. And he makes a post-entry pass to Şengün around the right block. And Jaylen Brown just bails off of Amen Thompson to double Şengün to try to go get a steal, kind of a reckless defensive play. But Amen Thompson, it just immediately triggers a response from him. He cuts right down through the middle of the lane, gets it back from Şengün, makes a layup on the left side of the basket. He has excellent feel for cutting to the basket. And then, like I talked about earlier, his vertical spacing is every bit as good as any of the vertical spacing centers that we have in this league. There are 27 NBA players who have logged at least 75 shot attempts on cuts to the basket this year. And it's 25 bigs, Amen Thompson and Mikal Bridges. That's how rare it is to see a non-center be that effective as a cutter. And he's 17th on that list in efficiency. So he's middle of the pack among a bunch of 7-footers. He's ahead of guys like Anthony Davis, Jakob Poeltl, Miles Turner. He is a bona fide, legit dunker spot threat, which is insane for a perimeter player. And then, as I mentioned earlier, he's the best non-center offensive rebounder in the league. He averages 2.8 offensive rebounds per game. That ranks 23rd in the league. But everybody above him is a center, except for Zion Williamson, who's only played in 12 games this year. There was a play that he had in the first half where the ball goes off the top of the backboard. There's like 3 Celtics in front of him, and he just goes ripping and swimming through them and just elevates over everybody, grabs it, and then dunks it in Jaylen Brown's face. It's like he is an absolute wrecking ball as an athlete in this league. And then lastly, as we talked about, he has a ton of on-ball potential in the big picture. He can relatively easily get downhill because he's got a good handle and top-tier, like A+++ athletic traits. And then he's got the short-range shot-making and the playmaking to be great there, just like Ja Morant is. Ja Morant, to me, even though Ja Morant plays a very different position, is kind of a comp for what Amen Thompson could be as a ceiling on the offensive end of the floor. A guy that you give the ball at the top of the key, and he can attack in straight ISO or ball screens, get downhill, play make, and make shots for his teammates. Like, he had this ball screen attack in the first half where he came off of a screen, drew help, and shoveled it to Steven Adams, and Steven Adams dunked it. And it happened so fast that it was one of the easiest shot attempts in a game where two elite defenses were not giving up many easy shot attempts. And it's just because he comes screaming downhill so fast that everyone reacts to it so aggressively that the passing read is easy. Just completely otherworldly potential for this kid, and it was on display in a big way in the win in Boston. Big win for Houston. We barely talked about their defense, which I thought was excellent. They had some issues with Tatum attacking their centers, but they did a really nice job of doubling and rotating out of it down the stretch, which allowed them to get enough stops. They started just kind of blitzing Tatum and pressuring him really far out to half court, and they were able to rotate out of it pretty good. We talked about the Amen Thompson block where he saved it inbounds. They forced 15 turnovers and scored 21 points off of them. Their transition attacks were sharp. They had another transition attack in the first half. One where they got Amen Thompson a lob. Literally looked like a drill. The coaches were probably incredibly thrilled. Like just defensive rebound, kick ahead pass, one dribble, lob from almost half court. It was like a lightning fast 3-man weave that led to a dunk. They had 1.64 points per transition possession in this game. That's an amazing efficiency stat there. Their late game execution was really good. It was just another really impressive win for a Rockets team that's kicking everybody's ass right now. Really, really impressive stuff. On the Celtics front, I was particularly interested in this game as an evaluation of their ability to attack a physical defense that can do a lot of switching and test their biggest weakness as of late, which has been settling, right? The Celtics have had a ton of issues with Tatum and Brown settling for tough shots instead of attacking to get the defense in rotation. And I thought this game would be a good challenge for them, even though they had guys out of the lineup. Like, I'm not so concerned win-loss here because obviously it's a different game if Al Horford and Derek White play, right? And I think Sam Hauser was out for this one too. I can't remember. But when you got guys out of the lineup, it's not so much about the win and the loss. You had enough talent to win that game, though. To me, it's about process. I'm looking at a specific weakness that the Celtics have been having and whether or not they're trending in the right direction. Specifically with Houston, there is a way to attack their defense. They have these centers in Steven Adams and Alperen Şengün that they try really hard not to switch with. And what that means is when you run ball screens, they're going to run some sort of like traditional type of coverage, probably a high drop, low drop, or they'll blitz or come up to the level, right? They're going to try to not switch as much as possible. So you can get the ball into the pocket against them, meaning the big can show and you can hit the roll man rolling to the basket, right? You can get the defense in rotation attacking Şengün and Adams in ball screens. Now, Houston is a very good team in rotation, and they're going to clean up a lot of that. And they did clean up a lot of that in this game. But no defense is nearly as good in rotation as they are when they're loaded up. That's the way to attack. So what I wanted to see in this game, right off the bat, was a steady diet of Jayson Tatum running action at the top of the key that involves Houston's bigs. And instead, Jayson Tatum was almost completely uninvolved early. They were playing almost exclusively through Jaylen Brown, which has been a really weird trend of late. There's been way less Tatum and way more Brown. In the last 6 games, Jaylen Brown is taking almost 2 more shots per game than Jayson Tatum is. They opened up this game trying to attack Jalen Green in the post with Jaylen Brown. And again, there was some success there. Jalen's too small for Jaylen Brown. And he was able to work against him. The problem is that Jaylen Brown has been doing a mostly awful job of spraying the ball out on his post-ups. He's mostly playing on an island within himself. And I believe personally that playing this much through Jaylen Brown disrupts the team's rhythm because they don't get into their drive and kick sequences as often. Now, Tatum got more and more involved as the game progressed, but interestingly enough, things really took off for the Celtics in that late third quarter when Jayson Tatum started spamming high ball screens that involved Houston centers. He started to get downhill so that Houston had to collapse on him. Then they were in rotation and they were playing advantage basketball. They started getting better shots and more offensive rebounds because Houston wasn't matched up for defensive rebounds because they're in rotation, and they get their biggest lead of the game. Tatum really started that in the late third quarter, and that was when the game really turned around. The only thing that really caused problems for Boston's offense in the fourth quarter was when Houston would double team Jayson Tatum because they were pressuring him pretty well out to half court, and Boston just wasn't really sharp with their decision making. Example, like Porzingis caught on a blitz once, and there was a wide open shooter in the corner. I think it was Drew Holiday, but like he just missed the read. And so when Fred VanVleet came up and pressured him, by the time he got it to Drew, it just was too late. Like just A couple things, like you got to flash harder out to the ball, make yourself available, and then you got to be quick with your decision making out of it to beat those double teams. But that was the one thing that gave them some issues in the fourth quarter. But again, Tatum was bringing 2 to the ball. That's the job. You got to figure out a way to score off of that. Again, Houston is a really good team, and Boston is banged up and tired. So it's not even about the win or the loss. I just think the largest barrier right now between where Boston is and where they need to be to repeat as champions is the same barrier that stood in their way before they were champions. Offensive process. Everything they do needs to be viewed through the lens of how can we get the defense in rotation, not necessarily finding a matchup for Tatum or Brown to shoot directly over. Because those guys have a habit of trying to shoot over the top of people. If you look at the offensive process more through the lens of where can we attack that will inevitably lead to 2 on the ball or those inside seals that we can get those 4-on-3s out of, then they will be able to get the defense in rotation more and play Celtics basketball. If they play more through the lens of let's get the ball somewhere where Jayson Tatum or Jaylen Brown can attack a mismatch one-on-one, I think that's where it ends up into more of those problematic settling situations. Now, here's the thing. It's not all going to be about just like finding the guy on the floor that's not going to switch. You will inevitably run into a team at some point in this process that does a ton of switching. We talked about this in the Laker game the other night. Then it really will come down to Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum not settling, getting downhill. And again, guys, like we've seen this work. When did they blow out Dallas? When did they gain control of games against Dallas? When Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum started getting Luka in switches and driving past him rather than trying to shoot over the top of him. That's going to be the main thing to keep track on. Joe Mazzulla was talking a lot after the game about how it was his fault on those final 2 possessions. The Amen Thompson shot, I don't know what you do. That's probably the best athlete you've got in Jaylen Brown. You've got to put him on Amen Thompson. And I mean, Dillon Brooks was hitting. If you leave a Fred VanVleet open, he's hit a bunch of big catch and shoot shots as of late. Like if you abandon Şengün, he could score on the offensive rebound putback. Like that one, Amen Thompson made a freaky athletic play and hit a shot. There's not really a ton you can do about that. Now the one before that, the one where Şengün beat Kornet on the slip, that was just bad positioning from Kornet. He was so far up. He was like literally attached to Şengün's body, so he was just able to kind of swim around him and get downhill. Kornet's just got to give him a little bit more space and realize that Şengün catching out at 25 feet from the basket is not going to hurt you immediately. It's something that you can react to. So I didn't think necessarily Mazzulla did anything to... Now, Mazzulla did go with a lot of Jrue Holiday on Şengün down the stretch, but even if he says that, I don't necessarily think that was the answer either. Like, Şengün was doing some damage to Jrue Holiday, spun off of him and dropped it off to Amen Thompson for another layup along the baseline. Drew a foul against him for 2 free throws. Came across the lane and dropped it off to Amen Thompson for that little short fadeaway jump shot. That was when Jrue Holiday did get 1 steal on a post-up of Şengün, but to my knowledge, I think of the 4 times they posted Şengün on Jrue Holiday down the stretch, he scored 3 of them. So I don't think necessarily switching Jrue Holiday onto Şengün. Now, Jrue Holiday probably doesn't get the easy slip dunk, maybe, but like, again, Kornet just has to know better in that case. But like, I think I disagree that, that Joe Mazzulla could have just put Jrue Holiday on Şengün and all of a sudden all your problems go away. Like, the Rockets made some plays. You got to give them some credit, particularly that Amen Thompson one.